The cabin materialized through sheets of Oregon rain, like a ghost refusing to stay buried. Catherine Morrison stood before it, her Honda Civic dying 70 yards back on a muddy logging road, 3 children huddled behind her. Emma, 16 and furious. Dylan, 12 and trying not to show fear. Zoe, 8 and clutching a threadbare rabbit like it held answers. The structure sagged under decades of neglect, cedar planks blackened by weather, windows clouded with grime thick as cataracts, but the roof held. The porch steps, though slick with moss, bore weight without groaning. Catherine's hand trembled as she worked the rusted key into the lock. She had driven 4 hours from Portland with everything they owned compressed into garbage bags and 2 suitcases, fleeing an apartment they could no longer afford, a city that had chewed them up and spit them onto this forgotten trail. The key, handed to her by Marcus Reed, a lawyer she'd met exactly once, turned with surprising ease, as if the mechanism had been waiting. The door swung inward. Dust motes erupted in the weak afternoon light, dancing like disturbed spirits. The smell hit first. Damp wood, decades of trapped air, something organic and faintly sweet that spoke of rot without quite crossing into decay. Then Catherine saw it. The impossibility that made her breath catch. Fresh fingerprints marked the dusty window pane from inside. Smeared arcs where someone had recently pressed against the glass, looking out. On the old wood stove in the corner, a tin cup sat beside a plate, both items wet with condensation as if just washed. The fire grate held ash, and when Catherine knelt to touch it, warmth radiated against her palm. Someone had been living here. Recently. Maybe minutes ago. Emma pushed past, wet sneakers tracking mud across the pine floor, her jaw set in that particular way she'd perfected since her father left. Equal parts defiance and despair. This is it? This is your plan? A haunted shack in the middle of nowhere? Catherine straightened, wiping ash on her jeans. It's shelter. It's ours. That's more than we had yesterday. We had an apartment yesterday. We had a city. We had nothing. Catherine's voice cracked like river ice in spring. The eviction notice gave us 72 hours. The bank account had $340. Your father stopped sending support checks 6 months ago. This cabin is the only thing standing between us and sleeping in the car. Dylan moved through the space with the systematic curiosity of someone who'd learned to assess situations quickly. He tested floorboards with his weight, checked the pump handle on what looked like an old well system visible through the back window, ran his fingers along the stone fireplace that dominated one wall. His face remained neutral, but Catherine saw calculation in his eyes, her middle child, always trying to fix what the adults had broken. Zoe drifted to the far corner where a large steamer trunk sat beneath a tattered wool blanket. She cocked her head, listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. The key is in the flower jar, she said, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone reciting a grocery list. Under the 3rd step from the left. She wrote it down so no one would forget. Catherine froze. What did you say? The lady who lived here. She wrote instructions. The key to open this big box is hidden under the porch step, inside an old canning jar with flowers painted on it. 3rd step from the left as you face the door. Emma's anger shifted to concern. Zoe, how do you know that? The 8-year-old shrugged, still staring at the trunk. I read it last night, in her diary, while I was sleeping. Catherine exchanged glances with Emma. Zoe had always been unusual, a child who remembered every book she'd ever read, every conversation, every detail of every day since she was 3. The doctors called it highly superior autobiographical memory. explaining that perhaps 1 in 10 million people possessed such a brain, capable of storing and retrieving information with photographic precision. But Zoe's gift extended beyond mere memory. She seemed to absorb knowledge from her environment in ways that defied explanation, as if her consciousness could reach out and read the history soaked into walls, objects, air itself. Dylan was already heading for the door.
I'll check the steps.
Rain intensified as he knelt on the porch, prying at the third plank with his pocket knife. Wood splintered, old but not completely rotted through. His hand emerged holding a mason jar wrapped in oilcloth, the glass painted with faded daisies. Inside, a brass key nested on a bed of dried lavender that still held its scent after God knew how many years. Catherine accepted the jar with shaking fingers. The key fit the trunk's lock perfectly, turning with a soft click that felt like acknowledgement. She lifted the heavy lid, hinges protesting but functional, and found herself staring at the archived life of a woman she'd never met. Journals filled the upper tray, leather-bound volumes with dates embossed on spines ranging from 1952 to 1957. Beneath them, maps of the surrounding territory, some hand-drawn, others official survey documents bearing county seals and signatures that looked official enough to be authentic. A property deed, yellowed but intact, showed ownership of this land granted to one Alexander Whitmore in 1897, transferred to his granddaughter Margaret Whitmore in 1945. But it was the letter that stopped Catherine's heart, written on the inside of the trunk lid itself, carved into the wood with what must have been a knife or sharp tool. The words emerged in desperate, deliberate strokes. For those who need refuge, as I once did. If you read this, they are watching. Trust no one in Pine Valley. Find the truth before they find you. M.W., 1957. Emma read over her mother's shoulder, and for the first time since their world collapsed, Catherine heard genuine fear in her daughter's voice. Who's they? And what happened to her? Catherine reached for the topmost journal, hands no steadier than her voice. I don't know. But Marcus Reed, the lawyer who gave me the key, said Margaret Whitmore disappeared in 1957. Just vanished one February night. They searched for weeks. Never found a body. Never found anything. The journal fell open to a middle page, Margaret's handwriting cramped and urgent. February 1st, 1957. James was found dead this morning.
Heart attack, they said, though he was 45 and healthy as an ox. But I saw the bruises on his neck when they carried him out. Victor Blackwood came to the house last night. I heard them arguing. James was going to confess everything, the falsified records, the stolen deeds, all of it. Now he's dead. I'm next. I know I'm next. I have to hide the evidence before. The entry ended mid-sentence, ink trailing off as if the writer had been interrupted. Outside, the sound of an engine cut through the rain. Catherine moved to the window in time to see a black Mercedes SUV rolling to a stop where their Civic sat dead on the trail. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged, 60-something, silver hair swept back from a face that spoke of wealth maintained through multiple generations, wearing a Barber jacket that probably cost more than Catherine's last 3 months' rent combined. He looked directly at the cabin, then at Catherine through the dusty glass. Their eyes met. He smiled, cold, knowing, utterly without warmth, and started walking toward them. Emma backed away from the window. Mom, who is that? Catherine's throat constricted as pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The lawyer Marcus Reed had warned her, had tried to warn her, she realized now, speaking carefully around words he couldn't quite say outright. About disputed ownership, about powerful interests, about being careful. I think, Catherine whispered, That's Victor Blackwood. The man's footsteps were deliberate on the porch steps. He didn't knock. The door simply opened, and he filled the frame with the kind of presence that comes from a lifetime of entering spaces without permission and never facing consequences. Mrs. Morrison. His voice carried traces of expensive education, old money, quiet certainty. I believe you're trespassing on my property. Catherine found her spine, straightened it. This cabin was left to me. I have the deed. You have a deed from 1897. Victor stepped inside uninvited, tracking mud with European leather shoes that cost more than her car. Charming historical document, legally worthless. This property was acquired by Blackwood Timber Corporation in 1944 through a legitimate tax auction. Has been ours for 80 years. The deed says what desperate people want it to say. He moved deeper into the room, eyes cataloging everything. The trunk, the journals, the children. His gaze lingered on Zoe with an intensity that made Catherine's protective instincts flare. I know why you're here, Mrs. Morrison. Marcus Reed filled your head with romantic notions about lost inheritances and rightful claims. He's young, idealistic, doesn't understand how the world actually works. He's a lawyer who showed me legal documents. He's an associate at a firm that handles small-time property disputes. Victor's smile never reached his eyes. I employ the kind of lawyers who make associates like Reed wish they'd chosen different careers. Now, I'm a reasonable man. I understand you're in a difficult situation. Recently unemployed, I believe? Evicted? Bank account experiencing some unfortunate complications? The blood drained from Catherine's face. How do you know? I know a great many things, Mrs. Morrison. For instance, I know that your former landlord received a very generous offer to purchase his building. I know that your former employer's corporate restructuring was influenced by certain financial pressures. I know that banking errors can be remarkably persistent when the right people make the right calls. He let that sink in, watching her process the implications. I also know that all of these unfortunate circumstances could be resolved very easily. Emma stepped forward, placing herself between her mother and this man. You did this to us? You destroyed our lives? I created incentives. Victor's tone remained pleasant, conversational. The carrot is this. I have a cashier's check in my car for $50,000, enough to solve all your immediate problems and then some. Set you up somewhere nice, a fresh start. The stick. He glanced around the cabin with theatrical distaste. Is that continuing to occupy this property will result in criminal trespassing charges, civil suits for damages, and a level of legal harassment that will make the last month look like a vacation. Catherine's hands balled into fists at her sides. Every survival instinct screamed at her to take the money, grab her kids, run. $50,000 could mean stability, safety. A chance to rebuild without constantly looking over their shoulders. But then she looked at Emma's face, saw not just fear, but rage, the kind that came from watching adults capitulate to bullies too many times. Saw Dylan's quiet assessment, measuring the space between who his mother claimed to be and who her choices revealed. Saw Zoe still standing by the trunk, one small hand resting on Margaret Whitmore's journals as if drawing strength from a ghost. No, the word escaped before Catherine fully decided to say it. But once out, it felt right. We're not leaving. Victor's pleasant mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. You're making a serious mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Is it? He gestured to the children.
You're gambling with their futures, their safety, all for a rotting cabin in the woods based on the delusions of a woman who vanished 70 years ago. He pulled a business card from his pocket, set it on the trunk lid. I'll give you 48 hours to reconsider. After that, the offer expires, and the consequences begin. Choose wisely, Mrs. Morrison. He left with the same unhurried confidence he'd entered with, climbing into the Mercedes and driving away without looking back. The silence he left behind felt heavy, pregnant with all the ways this decision could destroy them. Emma turned on her mother, and Catherine braced for the explosion. But instead of anger, her daughter's voice came out small, almost broken. Why? Why didn't you take the money? We could have been safe. Safe, Catherine repeated, testing the word. Would we have been safe? Or would we have just been running again, knowing that every apartment, every job, every chance we got could be taken away by someone with enough money and malice? She gestured to the journals. Margaret Whitmore ran, or hid, or died trying to expose whatever Victor Blackwood's grandfather did. I don't know her whole story yet, but I know she didn't leave these here by accident. She left them for someone who needed this place as desperately as she once did. Someone who might finally finish what she started. Dylan moved to his mother's side, something hardening in his young face. Then we need to read them. All of them. Find out what she knew. They worked through the evening, rationing the candles they'd brought from Portland, taking turns reading aloud from Margaret's journals while rain hammered the roof. The woman who emerged from those pages was nobody's victim. She'd fled an abusive marriage to James Whitmore in 1952, taking refuge in her grandfather's hunting cabin with nothing but determination and a growing suspicion that her husband's work as a county land assessor involved more than legitimate government business. April 12, 1952. First night alone in grandfather's cabin. James will search for me, but he always considered this land worthless, too remote to develop, too far from town to farm. That worthlessness is my salvation. I can survive here. I can be free. June 3rd, 1952. Ventured into Pine Valley for supplies. The stares followed me everywhere. A woman alone is suspect. A woman who left her husband might as well be criminal. But Mr. Porter at the general store was kind. His wife less so. But she sold me flour and salt and didn't spit in my face, which counts as victory. August 15th, 1952. Found grandfather's old papers in the cellar. Survey maps, property boundaries, tax records. Something wrong here. The boundaries keep changing between documents. Land that belonged to our family in 1940 shows as county property by 1943, then Blackwood property by 1944. How does that happen? How does anyone's land just disappear? The journals chronicled Margaret's transformation from refugee to detective, documenting her growing certainty that Victor Blackwood Sr. had orchestrated a systematic theft of property throughout Pine Valley County, using falsified tax assessments and fraudulent auctions to acquire tens of thousands of acres. James Whitmore, her estranged husband, had been the county assessor who'd signed the paperwork making it all legal. November 2nd, 1953. James came to the cabin today, drunk, crying. He confessed everything, said Blackwood paid him $500 per property to mark taxes as delinquent when they weren't. Said the county clerk, William Turner, got $300 per property to process the fake delinquencies. Said they'd done it 30, maybe 40 times between 1941 and 1944. Said he couldn't live with it anymore. I told him to go to the authorities. He laughed. Said Blackwood owns the authorities. Said anyone who tries to expose this ends up dead or disappeared. Then he left. I haven't seen him since. April 3rd, 1954. The baby came last night. A girl. Perfect and tiny and mine. But I can't keep her. If Blackwood knows I have a daughter, he'll use her against me. I've arranged for Robert and Martha Porter to adopt her. They're good people, childless, desperate for a baby. They'll love her as I cannot safely do. I'll watch from a distance. It's the only way to keep her alive.
Catherine stopped reading, throat too tight to continue.
Emma took the journal gently, found her place, kept going.
October 12th, 1956. William Turner came to me today, the county clerk. He's dying, cirrhosis from drinking away his guilt. He brought his confession, signed and notarized. Names, dates, properties, amounts paid. Everything. He said his conscience won't let him die in silence. I've hidden it where Blackwood can never find it. The well, 15 feet down, in a false stone.
The first piece of evidence that could bring them all down. February 1st, 1957. James is dead. They say heart attack, but I know better. Victor Blackwood Sr. came to see him last night. I watched from the woods, heard them shouting. James was going to confess. Now he's dead. I'm next. I have to finish hiding everything before. The entry ended there. The remaining pages were blank.
But tucked into the back of the journal, folded small, Catherine found a hand-drawn map showing 3 locations marked with X's. The well behind the cabin, something labeled hearth cellar, and a spot in the woods near the lightning oak. Zoe traced the map with one finger, eyes distant. She hid evidence in 3 places. The confession is in the well. The ledgers are under the fireplace. The proof of payment is buried by the tree. She made a treasure hunt because she knew they'd kill her before she could use it herself.
How do you know that?
Emma's voice held wonder now, not skepticism. I can see it all, like I read every page. Zoe looked up, and Catherine saw something ancient in her 8-year-old daughter's eyes. She wrote more than what's in the journals. She carved things on the walls when she was scared. She left messages in places they wouldn't think to look. And she knew someday someone like us would come, someone who needed the cabin as much as she did. Someone who could finish her fight. Dylan examined the map more closely. If we find these things, the confession, the ledgers, the payments, we could prove Blackwood Timber was built on fraud. We could prove this land belongs to Margaret's descendants. Rose Porter, Catherine said softly, remembering another detail from Marcus Reed's careful explanations. The woman who owns the general store now. She was adopted by Robert and Martha Porter in 1954. The pieces assembled themselves into devastating clarity. Margaret's daughter. Rose is Margaret's daughter, and she doesn't even know it. The rain had stopped sometime during their reading. Now moonlight filtered through clearing clouds, painting the cabin interior in shades of silver. Catherine stood, moving to the window, looking out at the dark forest. Somewhere out there, Victor Blackwood sat in his mansion built on stolen land, confident that poverty and fear would drive her away, just as it had driven away or destroyed everyone else who'd threatened his empire. Behind her, Emma spoke with a new quality in her voice, not anger now, but something harder and more durable. We're going to need help. We can't do this alone. Marcus Reed, Catherine agreed. And we need to tell Rose Porter who she really is. She has a right to know. And then? Dylan's question hung in the air, practical and necessary. Catherine turned from the window, looked at her 3 children, these humans she'd brought into a world that kept trying to crush them, who kept finding reasons to keep standing anyway. Behind them, Margaret Whitmore's trunk sat open, journals spilled across the floor like scattered prophecy. The woman who wrote them had vanished, trying to expose the truth, had abandoned her own daughter to keep her safe, had died or disappeared or fled, rather than let the Blackwoods bury what she'd discovered. Then we find the evidence. We build the case. We drag every piece of fraud and murder and theft into the light. Catherine's voice steadied as the decision crystallized. And we finish what Margaret started, even if it costs us everything. Emma moved to stand beside her mother, followed by Dylan, then Zoe.
4 figures silhouetted against the moonlit window of a cabin that had witnessed one woman's desperate fight for justice and now prepared to host another's.
Outside, the Oregon forest stretched in every direction, hiding secrets in old wells and lightning-struck trees, holding truth beneath hearthstones and inside rotting trunks. The fight was just beginning. But for the first time in months, Catherine Morrison felt something other than despair. She felt purpose.
And in this forgotten corner of Oregon, surrounded by ghosts and children and 70-year-old evidence, that would have to be enough.
The first night passed in fitful sleep. Catherine took the narrow cot near the fireplace, giving the children the loft space where old quilts and wool blankets provided insulation against the mountain chill. She lay awake, watching moonlight track across the ceiling, listening to the cabin settle around her with creaks and sighs that could have been old wood, or could have been something else entirely.
Every sound made her think of Victor Blackwood's Mercedes,
of his knowing smile, of the casual way he'd admitted to orchestrating her family's destruction like a man discussing weather patterns. Sometime near dawn, Dylan climbed down from the loft and sat beside her cot. He didn't speak, just sat there in the darkness, and Catherine realized her son was keeping watch.
12 years old and already understanding that threats could materialize in the night.
That safety was conditional. That family meant standing guard while others slept.
"We're going to be okay," she whispered,
though neither of them believed it.
"I know."
He stood, checked the door lock one more time, returned to the loft. 5 minutes later, she heard his breathing even out into sleep. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through dirty windows and the reality of their situation.
No electricity meant no refrigeration, no heat except what the fireplace could provide, no light after dark beyond candles.
The hand pump outside produced water that tasted of iron and minerals, but ran clear after the rust worked through. Catherine filled every container they had, set them inside, started cataloging what they needed to survive beyond the next 72 hours. Food, heat source, better light, money for all of the above. The Honda sat dead on the trail where it had given up, and Catherine lacked both the knowledge and resources to fix it. They were stranded 12 miles from Pine Valley, with no transportation, $340 rapidly dwindling, and a growing list of necessities that money couldn't buy, like knowing how to live off-grid, or who to trust in a town where Margaret Whitmore had been convinced everyone was either complicit in corruption or too scared to fight it.
Emma emerged from the loft with her hair tangled and dark circles stamped beneath her eyes,
looking older than 16. She'd slept in her clothes. They all had.
"I'm walking to town," she announced. "We need food. Real food, not just the granola bars and crackers we brought."
Catherine started to object, then stopped herself. Emma wasn't asking permission. She was informing.
And the truth was, they did need supplies.
And Catherine needed to stay here with Dylan and Zoe, needed to start figuring out how to make this place habitable beyond just surviving until the next crisis. "Take the $80 from my wallet. Be careful. Don't talk to strangers." "Mom, everyone in Pine Valley is a stranger." "Then don't talk to anyone." Catherine pulled her daughter close, held on longer than Emma's squirming suggested she wanted. Straight there and back. If anything feels wrong, anything, you run. You hear me? Emma extracted herself from the embrace with teenage efficiency. I'm not a child. You're my child. That doesn't change just because the world decided to get complicated. She watched her daughter disappear down the muddy trail, then turned to find Zoe sitting cross-legged beside Margaret's trunk, reading through journals with that uncanny speed that still unnerved Catherine even after years of witnessing it. The child's lips moved slightly, and Catherine knew she was committing every word to permanent memory, building an internal archive that would outlast the paper. What are you learning? Catherine settled beside her youngest, genuinely curious. Margaret loved her daughter more than anything, but she loved truth more. That's why she gave Rose away, because keeping her would have meant staying silent. Zoe looked up with eyes that seemed to see straight through to uncomfortable places. Would you do that? Give us away to keep us safe? The question hit like a blade between ribs. I don't know, baby. I hope I never have to find out. Margaret hoped that too. But hope didn't stop them from killing her husband, didn't stop them from making her choose. Dylan called from outside, voice tight with the particular alarm of someone trying not to panic. Catherine reached the door in seconds, found her son pointing toward the trail where fresh tire tracks gouged the mud. Multiple vehicles, large treads, recent enough that the impressions hadn't started filling with groundwater yet. Someone came while we were sleeping, Dylan said. Or maybe right before dawn. They stopped about 100 yards back, then left. Watching us. Catherine's stomach dropped. Making sure we knew they could get close any time they wanted. She scanned the tree line, seeing nothing but Oregon forest, dense with pine and undergrowth. But the feeling of being observed pressed against her skin like physical weight. Somewhere out there, Victor Blackwood's people, security, employees, whoever he paid to do his dirty work, were monitoring, reporting back, waiting for orders. The morning turned into a crash course in practical survival. Catherine got the fireplace drawing properly, figuring out the damper system and which wood burned longest. Dylan investigated the cellar Margaret's map had indicated beneath the hearth, finding the entrance exactly where the journal described, behind the 13th stone from the left, a false panel that swung open to reveal narrow stairs descending into darkness. They needed flashlights before exploring down there, but Catherine filed the discovery away as progress. Margaret had hidden her husband James's ledgers in that cellar. Proof of which properties had been stolen, when, for how much. The kind of evidence that could unravel an empire if presented properly. If they could retrieve it. If it still existed. If Victor Blackwood hadn't found it decades ago and destroyed it. Too many ifs. Catherine pushed them aside, focused on immediate problems. They needed. The sound of an approaching vehicle froze her mid-thought. But this wasn't the aggressive rumble of the Mercedes. This was older, rougher, accompanied by the distinctive squeal of brakes that needed replacing. Catherine moved to the window in time to see a battered pickup truck park behind the Honda, and a woman who had to be in her 70s climbing out with practiced ease. She wore practical clothes, canvas pants, flannel shirt, work boots, and carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime earning respect rather than demanding it. White hair pulled back in a braid revealed a face weathered by sun and time, but sharp with intelligence. She looked at the cabin, seemed to make some internal decision, then called out without approaching closer. Mrs. Morrison? I'm Rose Porter. I run the general store in Pine Valley. Your daughter Emma is there now, and I thought you might appreciate a ride back rather than making her walk 12 miles with supplies. Catherine opened the door slowly, analyzing every detail. Rose Porter.
Margaret's daughter, standing there unknowing, calling out in a voice that carried traces of her mother's determination without realizing it. The universe had a dark sense of humor, dropping this particular woman into this particular moment. "That's kind of you," Catherine managed.
But I should warn you. Victor Blackwood made it very clear we're not welcome here. Associating with us might be complicated. Rose's expression hardened in ways that spoke of experience with complicated. Victor Blackwood has been telling people what to do in this valley for 40 years. I stopped listening to him about 39 years ago. She gestured to the truck. I brought some things. Firewood, oil lamps, basic foodstuffs. Figured you might need them, being new to off-grid living and all. No charge. Consider it a welcome gift. Catherine descended the porch steps carefully, aware of Dylan watching from the doorway with protective suspicion. Why would you help us? You don't know us. I know enough. I know Marcus Reed doesn't take cases unless he believes in them. I know this cabin has sat empty since before I was born, and everyone in town has a different story about why.
And I know. Rose's voice dropped, becoming something more personal. That Margaret Whitmore was the bravest woman who ever lived in Pine Valley, and she deserves better than her legacy being erased by Blackwood money. You knew her? No. She disappeared 5 years before I was born, but I've heard the stories all my life. The woman who stood up to the Blackwoods, the one who vanished rather than be silenced. Rose tilted her head, studying Catherine with sudden intensity.
You look a little like the photograph.
What photograph?
The one in the Historical Society, Margaret Whitmore, taken around 1950. You've got her eyes, same shape, same color. Are you related?
Catherine's mind raced through possibilities, landed on partial truth. Distantly. Great-aunt, maybe? The genealogy gets fuzzy, but yes, that's why this property came to me. Last surviving heir they could locate. It wasn't quite a lie.
She did have some connection, however tenuous, traced through enough generations of family trees that Marcus Reed had been able to make the legal case. But the real inheritance wasn't blood. It was circumstance. Margaret had left this cabin specifically for someone who needed it the way she once had. Someone desperate enough to fight. Rose helped them unload supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd done this sort of thing before. Hurricane lamps and oil, matches waterproofed in glass jars, candles by the dozen, dried beans and rice and flour, canned goods enough for weeks. Dylan carried loads with adult-sized determination, while Zoe organized everything inside with her peculiar gift for creating order. Within an hour, the cabin had transformed from barely habitable to actually functional. Over coffee, instant but hot and reviving, Rose sat at the old wooden table and spoke with the careful precision of someone delivering information they knew might be dangerous. Victor Blackwood came to my store this morning. First time he's set foot in there in 20 years. Warned me about getting involved with squatters. Suggested my property taxes might be due for reassessment if I didn't show better judgment. She sipped her coffee, unfazed. I told him my taxes have been paid in full for 57 consecutive years, and if he wanted to audit them, I kept every receipt since 1968. He left after that.
He'll retaliate, Catherine said quietly. That's what he does. He's already destroyed my job, my bank account, my housing, all because I wouldn't walk away from this cabin. Yes, he probably will. Rose set down her cup. But here's what you need to understand about Pine Valley.
This is a company town, and Blackwood Timber is the company. 800 employees, 2,000 people dependent on those paychecks. The mill, the logging operations, the trucking, all Blackwood. Most folks here have no choice but to keep their heads down and their mouths shut because crossing him means losing everything. Then why are you helping us? Because I'm 76 years old. I own my store outright, and I've got enough money saved to retire any time I want.
Which means I have something most people here don't have. Freedom to tell the truth. Rose leaned forward.
And the truth is, there are families in this valley who've spent 70 years knowing their land was stolen, knowing Blackwood Sr. paid off county officials to falsify tax records, knowing people who tried to fight ended up dead or disappeared. They couldn't speak up because speaking up meant destroying themselves.
But if someone from outside, someone with nothing left to lose, decided to dig up all those buried secrets, well, that might be different.
Catherine absorbed this, understanding the terrain Rose was mapping.
You're saying we wouldn't be alone if we fight?
I'm saying that if you can prove what Margaret Whitmore died trying to prove, there are people who testify, people who remember, people who've been waiting 7 decades for someone brave enough or crazy enough to take the shot.
Rose stood, collecting her cup.
But I'm also saying Victor Blackwood is more dangerous than you probably realize. His grandfather was ruthless. His father was vicious. Victor combines both qualities and adds modern resources. If you do this, if you really commit to this fight, it won't be some clean legal battle. It'll be war. And in war, people get hurt. Dylan spoke up from where he'd been listening by the fireplace. We're already hurt. He already destroyed us.
What's left for him to take? Rose looked at the 12-year-old with something like recognition.
Everything you haven't thought to protect yet. Everyone you care about. Every small joy you still manage to find. Men like Victor Blackwood don't just defeat their enemies. They erase them. She moved toward the door, paused. Marcus Reed is a good man. Smart, ethical, determined. But he's young, and he's never gone against someone with Blackwood's resources.
You'll need help beyond what one small-town lawyer can provide.
Where do we find that help? I don't know yet, but I'll make some calls. I still have a few connections from my activist days. Rose smiled at Catherine's surprise. You think I got this stubborn by accident? I was at Wounded Knee in '73, Occupy Wall Street in 2011. I know what fighting power looks like, and I know it's always worth doing even when you lose.
It's because when you lose, because that's how the next generation learns the fight is possible. After Rose left, Catherine stood on the porch, watching the truck disappear down the trail, feeling something shift inside her. They weren't alone. This wasn't just her family against an empire. There were allies, potential witnesses, other victims waiting for vindication. The fight was bigger than one cabin, one woman's journals, one desperate family. But Rose's warning echoed too. Victor Blackwood would escalate, would hurt them in ways they hadn't imagined yet. Would. The thought shattered as Dylan's shout pulled her inside at a run. She found him in the loft, pale and shaking, holding one of Margaret's later journals open to a page dated January 1957. They took my daughter. The words were written in frantic, wavering script, so different from Margaret's usual careful hand. Not physically. They don't know she exists, don't know about the adoption. But they took her anyway. Today I watched from across the street while Rose, my baby girl, performed in her school Christmas pageant. She was an angel, perfect and bright, and so beautiful it hurt to breathe. And I realized that even though she's safe, even though the Porters love her and she'll never know what I sacrificed, I lost her. I chose truth over motherhood, chose exposing corruption over being able to hold my own child. Was it worth it? Will it ever be worth it?
Catherine closed the journal gently, looked at her children. Emma still in town, Dylan here shaking, Zoe reading silently in the corner, and felt Margaret's question like a blade against her throat.
What was she willing to sacrifice? What would she trade for justice? And when Victor Blackwood came for them, not if, but when, would she have the strength to pay the price Margaret had paid? The answer arrived sooner than expected, delivered by Emma stumbling through the door 3 hours late, clothes torn, face scraped, left leg dragging at an odd angle. Blood matted her hair where her scalp had split, and her eyes carried the particular shock of someone who'd just learned how quickly safety could transform into violence. Catherine caught her daughter before she collapsed, easing her onto the cot while Dylan grabbed clean water and Zoe found the first aid kit Rose had included in her supplies. Emma's breathing came in ragged gasps, and when she tried to speak, the words tangled with sobs.
Truck. Black pickup. No plates.
Mile marker 18, where the road narrows.
They came from behind, fast. I jumped into the ditch, rolled, felt my legs snap. They stopped. One of them got out, stood there looking down at me. Didn't say anything, just looked. Then drove away. Catherine cleaned the scalp wound with hands steady, despite the rage and terror burning through her veins. The leg was definitely broken. She could see the angle wrong even through the jeans. They needed a hospital. They needed police. They needed no cops. Emma gripped her mother's wrist hard enough to bruise.
The guy who got out, I saw his jacket, had a Blackwood Timber logo on it. And the truck, it was the same kind I saw parked at their mill office when I walked past on the way to Rose's store. So there it was. Victor Blackwood's response to Catherine's refusal, delivered with calculated violence against a 16-year-old girl. Not an accident. A message.
A demonstration of what happened to people who didn't accept his generous offers.
Catherine finished bandaging Emma's head, then carefully splinted the leg using boards Dylan brought from the woodpile. Her daughter's face had gone pale with pain, sweat beading her forehead despite the cool air. They needed proper medical care, needed x-rays and possibly surgery, and certainly pain management beyond the ibuprofen in their first aid kit.
But going to Pine Valley Hospital meant putting themselves in Blackwood's territory, in a facility he probably funded, treated by doctors who depended on his goodwill for their livelihoods. It meant filling out police reports that would go nowhere because the sheriff took Blackwood campaign donations. It meant creating a paper trail that would get them labeled as troublemakers, frauds, people staging accidents to gain leverage in a property dispute. Emma seemed to read her mother's thoughts. We can't run. If we run now, he wins.
Margaret dies for nothing. All those families lose their land forever. And he learns he can hurt kids to get what he wants. You're 16 with a broken leg. I'm 16 and I've already been hurt. Running won't make me safe. It'll just make us cowards. Catherine looked to Dylan, who nodded. To Zoe, who met her eyes with that ancient awareness and said simply, Margaret chose to fight. We have to choose too.
The decision crystallized in Catherine's chest. Painful, terrifying, absolutely certain. They would stay. They would fight. And when Victor Blackwood came at them again, and he would, they would meet him with every scrap of evidence Margaret had hidden, every witness willing to testify, every piece of his grandfather's corruption dragged into merciless light. But first, Emma needed a doctor who wouldn't report to Blackwood. Catherine pulled out her phone, found Marcus Reed's number, prayed the spotty cell signal would hold long enough to connect.
He answered on the fourth ring. Mrs. Morrison? Emma's been hurt. We need help. And we need to know, right now, before this goes any further. Are you all in? Because if you're not, we need to find someone who is.
Silence stretched across the line, and Catherine could almost hear calculations running through the young lawyer's mind. Career prospects versus conscience.
Safety versus principle. The easy path versus the right one.
"I'm all in," Marcus said finally. "I'll be there in 40 minutes with a doctor I trust. Hang tight." Catherine disconnected, looked at her 3 children in the dim cabin light, and spoke the words that would bind them to this path no matter what came next. "We're finishing what Margaret started. All of it. Everything she found. Everything she hid. Everything she died trying to expose. We're bringing it out."
Victor Blackwood thinks he can hurt us into submission. He's about to learn what happens when you hurt people who have nothing left to lose. Outside, the Oregon forest held its secrets in silence. Somewhere in that darkness, evidence waited in old wells and cellar floors and lightning-struck trees. Somewhere, Victor Blackwood sat in his mansion believing he'd won this round, believing fear and violence would accomplish what bribery hadn't. And somewhere in the space between what was and what could be, Margaret Whitmore's ghost watched her daughter's beneficiaries make the same choice she'd made 70 years before. Truth over safety. Justice over peace. The hard right over the easy wrong. The fight had truly begun. Marcus Reed arrived exactly 38 minutes after Catherine's call, pulling up in a dusty Subaru with a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Brennan, while already moving toward Emma with a medical bag that looked well used. She examined the leg with quick efficiency, asked pointed questions about pain levels and sensation, then delivered her assessment with clinical directness. "Clean break, tibia and fibula both. Needs proper setting and casting. I can do it here if you're sure about avoiding the hospital, but understand, if there are complications, if I miss something, the delay could mean permanent damage." Emma's jaw set in that way Catherine recognized as immovable. "Do it here." Dr. Brennan glanced at Catherine, who nodded permission despite every maternal instinct screaming otherwise. The doctor retrieved supplies from her bag, local anesthetic, sterile wrappings, the portable materials of emergency medicine practiced in places where hospitals weren't options. She worked with the calm competence of someone who'd done this in worse conditions, and Emma bit down on a leather strap and didn't scream even when the bones shifted back into alignment. 40 minutes later, Emma's leg was properly casted, elevated, dosed with prescription pain medication that Dr. Brennan provided from her own stock. The doctor washed her hands in the bucket of well water, dried them on a clean towel, then turned to Catherine with an expression that mixed sympathy and warning. This wasn't an accident. The injury pattern, the timing, the location. Someone meant to hurt her badly enough to make a point, but not so badly they'd face serious criminal charges. That's calculated. Professional. "Victor Blackwood sent them," Catherine said flatly. "Probably. Though proving it would be another matter entirely." Dr. Brennan packed her supplies with methodical care. "I've lived in Pine Valley 32 years. Came here fresh out of medical school thinking I'd serve an underserved community. Took me about 6 months to understand how this place really works. Blackwood Timber isn't just the biggest employer, it's the entire economic ecosystem. The hospital where I work? Blackwood Foundation funded the new wing. The ambulance service? Blackwood donation. The medical school scholarships that brought half our staff here? You guessed it. Dylan had been listening from his position by the fireplace. So you're all owned by him? Not owned. Obligated. Grateful. Compromised. Dr. Brennan met the 12-year-old's eyes without flinching from the judgment there. And before you write us all off as cowards, understand that working within the system means I can still help people. Refusing to play along completely means getting pushed out. replaced by someone less willing to bend the rules when it matters. It's not heroic, but it's survival medicine in a company town. Marcus spoke up from where he'd been reviewing documents at the table. The question is whether enough people who've been surviving are ready to start fighting. Because Mrs. Morrison is right. We're going after all of it.
Every fraudulent land seizure, every falsified record, every piece of corruption Blackwood Sr. built his empire on. And we'll need witnesses, people willing to testify.
You'll need more than witnesses. Dr. Brennan's tone carried the weight of experience. You'll need physical evidence that can't be dismissed or destroyed. Documents, recordings, something concrete enough that even Blackwood's lawyers can't make it disappear.
Catherine gestured to the open trunk. Margaret's journals spread across the table.
We have Margaret Whitmore's documentation. 70 years of it. Margaret Whitmore's been dead since 1957. Her journals are hearsay, inadmissible in court, and easily challenged as historical fiction written by a disturbed woman. Dr. Brennan wasn't being cruel, just realistic. You need contemporary evidence, things that connect the historical fraud to current land holdings.
Proof that Blackwood Corporation is still benefiting from crimes committed 3 generations ago. Marcus tapped the property deed. The land itself is evidence. If we can show that 30 or 40 properties acquired between 1941 and 1947 were based on falsified tax assessments, we establish a pattern of systematic fraud. Couple that with testimony from descendants of the families who lost land, and we have a case. A case you'll lose. Dr. Brennan wasn't being pessimistic, just honest. Because Victor Blackwood will bring in lawyers from Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, the kind who specialize in making inconvenient truths disappear. They'll challenge jurisdiction, statute of limitations, chain of evidence, authenticity of documents. They'll bury you in motions and continuances until you run out of money and energy and hope. The silence that followed carried the weight of that reality. Catherine looked at Emma lying on the cot, leg elevated, face still pale with pain. Looked at Dylan, trying so hard to be the man he wasn't old enough to be yet. Looked at Zoe reading Margaret's journals with photographic recall, absorbing a dead woman's desperate fight. Then we need to make it impossible to ignore. Not a courtroom battle, a public revelation. Something so damning that the legal system has no choice but to act. Rose Porter's voice came from the doorway where she'd arrived unnoticed. You need the cellar evidence. The ledgers Margaret hid under the hearth.
If they still exist, if they're legible, they're the smoking gun. James Whitmore's own handwriting documenting every fraudulent assessment, every payment made, every family robbed. Catherine felt hope kindle despite her efforts to temper it. Zoe found the cellar entrance. We just need flashlights to explore down there. I brought 6. Rose set a canvas bag on the table. Along with some other supplies you'll need for evidence collection. Elastic sheeting to protect documents, camera equipment, everything Marcus suggested. Marcus stood, gathering his materials. Then we go tonight. The longer we wait, the more time Blackwood has to figure out what we're planning. He knows about Margaret's journals by now. His people have been watching. He'll assume we're looking for the hidden evidence. We need to find it before he does. Dr. Brennan checked her watch. I need to get back to the hospital before my absence is noticed.
But Catherine, she handed over a business card with a number written on the back.
That's my personal cell. If Emma's condition changes, if the pain worsens, if there's any sign of infection or complications, you call immediately. I'll come. No questions, no judgments, no reports to anyone. After she left, the remaining adults and children gathered around the cellar entrance.
Dylan had already pried away the false stone that concealed it, revealing narrow stairs descending into darkness that smelled of earth and time and secrets kept too long.
Marcus tested the first step, found it solid despite its age, then led the way down with flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The cellar was larger than Catherine expected, perhaps 15 feet square, with walls of fitted stone and a packed dirt floor.
Shelves lined 3 walls, most empty now except for broken pottery and the remnants of what might have been root vegetable storage decades ago. But along the back wall, partially hidden behind a fallen board, sat a metal trunk, similar to the one upstairs, but smaller, more compact. Rose reached it first, wiping away decades of dust to reveal a lock that looked newer than the trunk itself. Margaret replaced the lock. She wanted to make sure only someone with the key could access this. "Where's the key?" Dylan scanned the cellar with his flashlight.
Zoe's voice drifted down from the cabin above. In the journal dated October 1956, she wrote that she hid it inside the false bottom of the larger trunk, under the tray where the journals were kept. Catherine climbed back up, retrieved the trunk, felt along the bottom until she found the subtle seam indicating a false base.
Pressing at the corners in sequence,
Another detail Zoe recited from memory, released the panel to reveal a small compartment containing a single brass key on a leather cord. The key fit perfectly. The lock opened with a click that echoed in the confined space. Inside the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax that had cracked with age but still held, lay 17 leather-bound ledgers.
Marcus lifted the first one with hands that trembled slightly.
Opened it to reveal James Whitmore's meticulous handwriting, recording his own corruption in devastating detail. March 15, 1941. Blackwood payment received, $500. Marked Miller Farm, 80 acres, Section 12, as tax delinquent. Actual taxes paid in full February 10th. Forwarded false delinquency to Turner for processing. Auction scheduled April 1st.
Entry after entry, property after property. The systematic theft documented by the man who'd facilitated it. Names, dates, amounts, specific section numbers, and acre counts. A complete accounting of how Victor Blackwood Sr. had assembled his timber empire, one fraudulent seizure at a time. Marcus photographed each page with his phone, hand steady now, focused on the task. This is it. This is everything we need. With these ledgers and the confession from William Turner that's supposedly in the well, we can prove systematic fraud spanning 6 years and at least 30 properties. More than that, Rose had been examining the later ledgers, and her voice carried a new tension. Look at the dates. The seizures continued through 1956. James was still doing this 15 years after it started. And look at this entry from December 1956. She held out the ledger, pointing to a passage that made Catherine's blood run cold. December 8, 1956. V. Blackwood Jr., age 29, now handling payments, father retiring. Jr. knows everything, approves continuation of program. Discussed expansion into Clatsop County. My conscience cannot bear this much longer. Spoke to Margaret about confessing. She encouraged me. God help us both. Victor Blackwood. Marcus stared at the entry. The current Victor knew he was part of it from the beginning. This isn't just inherited wealth from crimes his grandfather committed. He personally participated in the fraud. Dylan, still in the cellar, called up. There's more down here. Another box, smaller. Metal, like a cash box. They descended again to find him holding a rusted strong box that had been concealed behind the trunk. The lock had corroded through, and it opened to reveal bundles of cash, old bills, denominations that hadn't been printed since the 1950s, probably $5,000 or $6,000 total. And beneath the money, a small black notebook filled with columns of numbers. Rose recognized it first. Payment ledger. This is William Turner's record of what he received from Blackwood. See, each entry matches a property seizure in James's ledgers. This is the other half of the conspiracy.
the proof that Turner was paid to process the false delinquencies. Catherine felt the weight of what they'd found settling over her like a physical presence. 70 years of hidden truth, preserved by a woman who'd sacrificed everything to keep it safe. Margaret had given up her daughter, her husband, her life, all to ensure this evidence survived until someone could use it. And now they had it. The question was whether they could keep it long enough to matter. The answer came at dawn, delivered by the sound of engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast on the logging road. Catherine scrambled from the cot where she'd been dozing beside Emma, grabbed one of Rose's flashlights, reached the window in time to see 3 black pickup trucks forming a perimeter around the cabin. Men emerged from each vehicle, a dozen total, wearing dark clothes and moving with military precision. Marcus appeared at her shoulder, having spent the night in his Subaru parked behind the cabin. They found out. Somehow Blackwood knows we discovered the cellar.
How? We were careful. No one else was here.
Doesn't matter how. What matters is they're here now, and they're not going to let us leave with that evidence. He moved to the back window, assessing escape routes. I count 12 men. They've blocked both trail exits. We're surrounded. Rose emerged from the loft where she'd been sleeping near the children. There's an old game trail behind the cabin. Follows the creek bed for about 2 miles before connecting to Forest Service Road 39. If we can reach it before they close the circle, we might have a chance.
We can't run.
Emma's voice, pain roughened but determined, cut through the planning.
Not with my leg. I'd slow you down and we'd all get caught.
Catherine's protective instincts warred with tactical reality. Emma was right. Trying to evacuate everyone, especially with a teenager on crutches, would guarantee capture. But leaving her daughter here while they fled felt like betrayal of the most fundamental kind. I'll stay with her. Dr. Brennan's Prius pulled up behind Marcus's Subaru, the doctor emerging with her medical bag. They won't hurt a minor in the presence of a physician. Too much liability, too much potential for witness testimony. And if they do try something, I'll make sure there's documentation.
You'd risk that?
Catherine could barely process the offer. I've been complicit through silence for 30 years. Maybe it's time to stop surviving and start fighting. Dr. Brennan moved to Emma's side, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. Get the evidence out. Make it public. That's the only way to protect any of us long-term. The decision crystallized fast. Driven by the sound of boots on the porch, fists hammering on the door, voices demanding entry. Catherine grabbed the metal trunk containing the ledgers. Marcus took Turner's cash box and payment records. Dylan scooped up the most crucial journals. Rose led them through the back door just as the front gave way to forced entry. They ran. The game trail was barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom. More suggestion than actual path, winding through dense undergrowth that caught at clothes and skin. Catherine's lungs burned within minutes, her city-soft body unprepared for this kind of exertion. But fear drove her forward. Fear for Emma left behind. Fear of what would happen if the ledgers were captured. Fear of how close they'd come to having everything Margaret died for disappear into Blackwood's vault forever. Shouts erupted behind them. Flashlight beams swept the forest. The pursuit had begun. Marcus ran with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd done cross-country in college, maintaining a pace Catherine could barely match. Dylan moved with 12-year-old agility, never complaining even when branches whipped his face. Rose, 76 years old, kept up through sheer, stubborn refusal to be the weak link. Zoe ran in silence, carrying nothing but her perfect memory of every word in Margaret's journals. The evidence existed in her mind now, preserved with the same permanence as the paper records they carried. Even if they lost the ledgers, Zoe could recite them page by page, entry by entry. That knowledge was both comfort and terrible responsibility. The creek appeared ahead, swollen with recent rain, running fast over smooth stones.
Rose veered left, following the bank upstream where the trees grew thicker and the undergrowth provided better cover.
The voices behind them grew more distant, confused by the terrain, splitting up to search multiple directions. They had maybe 10 minutes before the pursuers organized properly. Maybe less. Forest Service Road 39 emerged from the trees like salvation, a narrow dirt track that saw maintenance maybe twice a year but was flat enough for vehicles.
Rose's truck sat parked exactly where she'd left it the night before, hidden under pine boughs that she quickly swept aside. They loaded the trunks into the bed, covered them with a tarp, piled camping gear on top to make it look like any other outdoorsman's vehicle.
"Where do we go?"
Catherine tried to control her breathing, failed.
"They'll be watching Rose's store, Marcus's office, anywhere obvious."
"I know a place." Rose started the engine, pulled onto the forest road without headlights, navigating by the growing dawn.
"Old mining claim about 15 miles north. Friend of mine owns it, uses it maybe twice a year for deer hunting. Has a cabin, nothing fancy, but it's off-grid and unknown to Blackwoods people." Marcus was already on his phone, typing rapidly. "I'm uploading photos of every ledger page to a secure cloud server."
"Even if they catch us, the evidence will be accessible to my law partners in Portland. They'll know what to do with it."
"What about Emma?" Dylan's question carried all the anxiety Catherine was trying not to feel.
"Dr. Brennan will keep her safe. And Emma's smart. She knows not to tell them anything useful, even if they question her."
Rose navigated a hairpin turn with practiced ease. "What they'll learn is that we took the evidence and ran."
"Which buys us time to get it properly documented and into the right hands."
The mining claim cabin turned out to be a generous description for what was essentially a weathered shack with a wood stove and no plumbing. But it had a solid roof, walls that blocked the wind, and most importantly, isolation. Rose maneuvered the truck behind the structure, out of sight from the access road, then helped them unload. Inside, they spread the ledgers across a makeshift table fashioned from old crates.
Marcus continued photographing, uploading, creating redundant backups, while Catherine and Rose organized the documents chronologically. Zoe sat in the corner, eyes closed, reciting entries from memory to verify accuracy against the physical records. 34 properties. Marcus tallied the results. Stolen between March 1941 and January 1957. Total acreage, 18,640. Current estimated value if that land was returned to original families, somewhere north of $200 million. Catherine's hands stilled on the ledger she'd been examining.
200 million. That's conservative. Some of those properties include prime timber stands, waterfront access, mineral rights. The Blackwood fortune isn't just built on fraud. It's still actively profiting from it. Every board foot of lumber they cut from stolen land, every development they build, every resource they extract. All of it traces back to crimes committed 80 years ago.
Rose examined the payment ledger with practiced eyes.
And Victor Blackwood knew. That December 1956 entry proves he was an active participant, not an innocent inheritor. That changes everything legally. It means the conspiracy continued into the modern era. It also means he'll do anything to keep this from coming out. Marcus set down his phone, the full weight of their situation settling over him. We're not just threatening his family legacy, we're threatening his personal freedom.
If this evidence goes public, he faces criminal charges. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly even accessory to murder if we can prove his father or grandfather killed James Whitmore and Margaret.
The morning wore on intense documentation. They photographed, cataloged, cross-referenced, built a timeline that connected each fraudulent seizure to specific payments, specific documents, specific victims.
By noon, they had assembled a case that any honest prosecutor would have to pursue.
Finding that honest prosecutor was another matter. Marcus made calls from his cell phone, each one more frustrating than the last. The county prosecutor's office in Pine Valley had been funded by Blackwood donations for 40 years. Calling them would be suicide. The state attorney general's office was interested but needed time to investigate, form a task force, build their own case independent of what might be seen as contaminated evidence. They're saying it could take months. Marcus paced the small cabin, anger and frustration radiating off him. Months of investigation before they even decide whether to pursue charges. And in the meantime, what? We hide here with these ledgers, hoping Blackwood doesn't find us? Catherine had been quiet, thinking through options with the desperate creativity of someone who'd already lost everything once and refused to do it again. We don't need a prosecutor. Not yet. We need publicity. Media attention so bright and hot that Blackwood can't make this disappear quietly. The local paper is owned by Blackwood's cousin. Rose crushed that hope immediately. And the Portland papers won't touch it without verification from official sources. It's too risky, legally speaking. Then we go bigger. National media. Outlets that specialize in investigative journalism, exposing corruption, taking down powerful people. Catherine pulled out her phone, started searching. ProPublica, The Intercept, Washington Post investigative team. Someone who can protect sources and has the resources to withstand Blackwood's legal threats. Dylan had been listening while examining Turner's cash box more carefully. There's something else in here. Bottom corner, stuck under the lining. He pried it free. A small envelope, sealed with wax that had somehow survived intact. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in William Turner's shaky handwriting. October 15th, 1956. To whoever finds this, I am dying. Cirrhosis, the doctor says, from 20 years of drinking myself toward courage I never found. I helped Victor Blackwood Sr. steal land from 34 families. I falsified government records. I betrayed my oath and my community for money I spent on liquor trying to forget what I'd done. James Whitmore kept the details. I kept the payments. Together we documented everything. We thought maybe someday we'd find the courage to confess. But Victor Sr. made it clear what happens to people who talk. James is dead now. Heart attack, they said. I know better. I'm leaving this confession because I can't face God without trying to make amends. The land was stolen. The auctions were fraudulent. The families who lost everything deserved better. And Victor Blackwood built his empire on lies I helped him tell. If you're reading this, you found the evidence. Use it. Finish what James and I were too weak to do. Bring them to justice. William Turner, County Clerk, Pine Valley, Oregon. October 15th, 1956. Rose read the letter twice, then carefully refolded it. This is the testimony we needed. Contemporary, detailed, written by someone with direct knowledge. Combined with James's ledgers, this is unassailable. Marcus had stopped pacing, pulled up contacts on his phone. I know someone at the Oregonian, investigative reporter, won a Pulitzer for exposing police corruption in Eugene. She's aggressive, meticulous, and she doesn't back down from powerful people. If I can get her interested... Do it. Catherine made the decision without hesitation. But we give her copies only. The originals stay with us until we're sure she can publish without being shut down legally. The call lasted 40 minutes, Marcus explaining the evidence while the reporter, Jennifer Castellano, asked pointed questions about verification, chain of custody, potential witnesses. Catherine could hear the sharpness in the woman's voice even through the phone. The predatory excitement of a journalist who just caught scent of a major story. She's coming. Marcus disconnected, cautious optimism tempering his earlier frustration.
Driving down from Portland tonight. Wants to see everything, interview us, start building the story. She's already reached out to her editor, and they're considering it for a front-page Sunday feature with continued coverage through the week.
How long before it publishes?
Rose was thinking tactically, already calculating how much time they had before Blackwood discovered the publicity campaign. She needs 3, maybe 4 days to verify everything, contact the victims' families for statements, get legal review from the paper's attorneys. But once it publishes, it'll be everywhere. The story is too big to contain. Corruption spanning 80 years, hundreds of millions in stolen property, prominent business family implicated.
Marcus allowed himself a small smile.
Victor Blackwood's worst nightmare. Catherine wanted to feel relief, but Emma's absence gnawed at her. I need to check on my daughter, make sure Dr. Brennan kept her safe. We can't risk going back to the cabin yet. Rose's voice held sympathy, but also pragmatism. Blackwood's people are probably still there, searching, trying to figure out where we went. If they see you, they'll follow you here. Then I'll call Dr. Brennan.
The call went to voicemail. Catherine tried again. Again, voicemail.
3rd attempt. 4th. Each time her anxiety ratcheting higher until... Mrs. Morrison. Dr. Brennan's voice came through tight, stressed. I can't talk long. They questioned Emma for 2 hours. She told them nothing useful, but they're not leaving. Victor Blackwood himself is here now, and he's making it very clear that Emma stays until you return with the evidence. Catherine's world tilted.
He's holding my daughter hostage? He's calling it protective custody while he sorts out the property dispute. But yes, effectively he's holding her. And Mrs. Morrison.
The doctor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He knows you have the ledgers. Someone told him. He knows exactly what evidence you found, and he's willing to trade. Emma for the documents. You have until sundown tomorrow to decide. The line went dead. Catherine stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, the impossible choice crystallizing with brutal clarity. Her daughter or justice. Emma's safety or Margaret's legacy. The evidence that could free dozens of families from 80 years of injustice, or the 16-year-old girl currently being held by a man who'd already proven he was willing to hurt children to get what he wanted. Marcus reached for her arm, steadied her. We'll get her back. There are legal remedies, kidnapping charges, protective orders. From which court? Which police department? Catherine's voice came out hollow. You said it yourself. This is a company town. Blackwood owns the institutions that are supposed to provide protection. And even if we could get federal involvement, that takes time. Time Emma doesn't have. Rose had gone very still, a lifetime of calculated resistance playing out behind her eyes. There's another option. We give him copies of the ledgers, the real ones, but we keep the originals. Tell him the exchange has to happen somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses. Make it impossible for him to simply disappear Emma afterward. He'll never agree to a public exchange. Dylan had been so quiet, Catherine almost forgot he was there, but now he spoke with a clarity beyond his years. He wants the evidence destroyed, not just retrieved. He wants us silenced.
A trade in private means he can take both Emma and the ledgers, and we disappear, just like Margaret did. Zoe opened her eyes from where she'd been sitting in her trance-like state of photographic memory. Margaret wrote about this, about having to choose between people she loved and the truth she protected. She chose truth because she believed it would outlive the people trying to destroy it. But she also wrote, the child paused, accessing the exact words. Every choice costs something. The question is whether you can live with the price. Catherine looked at her youngest daughter, this 8-year-old who carried Margaret's entire life story in her flawless memory, and understood what was being asked.
Not what choice to make, but whether she could accept the weight of making it. We don't trade. The words emerged with more certainty than Catherine felt. We publish everything, ledgers, confessions, the whole story, and we do it now, tonight. Before Blackwood can silence anyone else or destroy any more evidence. We make it so public, so undeniable, that holding Emma becomes more dangerous for him than releasing her. Marcus hesitated. Jennifer Castellano needs time to verify. Then we don't go through the Oregonian. We post it ourselves. Social media, document sharing sites, every platform we can access. Raw evidence, unfiltered. Let the internet do what newspapers can't. Spread truth faster than power can contain it. That's legally risky. Marcus was already considering the angles. Blackwood's lawyers will claim we're compromising potential prosecution by releasing evidence publicly. They'll argue chain of custody is broken, documents are contaminated. Let them argue. Once the evidence is public, the pressure for official investigation becomes unstoppable. The Attorney General won't be able to ignore it. Neither will the FBI if we can establish federal jurisdiction. Catherine moved to the table, started organizing ledgers for photography. We photograph every page, every document, every piece of evidence. We create a website, post everything with context and explanation. We email it to every news outlet, every anti-corruption organization, every political figure who might care. We make this story too big to bury. Rose pulled out her laptop, old but functional. I know some people from my activist days.
They can get this in front of audiences Blackwood can't touch. Indigenous rights groups, environmental organizations, social justice networks. By morning, this story will be everywhere. They worked through the afternoon and into evening, building the case not for a courtroom, but for the court of public opinion. Dylan photographed ledger pages with professional precision, making sure every entry was legible. Marcus wrote narrative context, explaining the significance of each document. Catherine compiled family names of victims, cross-referencing with current property records, to show how Blackwood still controlled land stolen 80 years ago. Zoe provided details from Margaret's journals, her perfect recall filling gaps and adding human dimension to the story. The woman who'd fled an abusive marriage only to discover her husband's corruption. The mother who'd given up her daughter to protect her. The fighter who'd hidden evidence, knowing she might not survive to use it. By midnight, they had built something devastating. A website called The Blackwood Files, containing scanned ledgers, photographs of original documents, Turner's confession, excerpts from Margaret's journals, a comprehensive timeline of fraud spanning 16 years and 34 properties. The evidence was irrefutable. The story was undeniable. Marcus hesitated before clicking the publish button. Once this goes live, there's no taking it back. Blackwood will come after us legally, financially, possibly physically. Our lives as we knew them are over. Our lives as we knew them ended when Victor Blackwood decided a desperate family was easier to destroy than to ignore. Catherine placed her hand over Marcus's on the mouse. Publish it. Finish what Margaret started. The website went live at 12:47 a.m. Within minutes, Marcus began sharing links across social media platforms, tagging journalists and activists and anti-corruption watchdogs. Rose's network picked it up, spreading it through channels Blackwood would never think to monitor. By 2 a.m., the first shares and retweets appeared. By 4 a.m., a Portland television station was calling Marcus for comment. By dawn, #Blackwood Files was trending regionally. The response built like a wildfire in dry timber. News outlets picked up the story, initially skeptical but increasingly convinced as they reviewed the evidence. Legal experts weighed in on camera, calling the documentation
potentially the most comprehensive evidence of systematic property fraud in Oregon history. Descendants of victimized families began coming forward, adding their voices to the chorus demanding investigation. By noon the next day, the Oregon Attorney General announced a formal inquiry. By 2 p.m., federal authorities confirmed they were reviewing the evidence for potential civil rights violations. By 4 p.m., Victor Blackwood's lawyers issued a statement denying all allegations and threatening defamation suits. And at 4:47 p.m., Dr. Brennan called with news that made Catherine's knees buckle with relief. He released her. Victor Blackwood just walked out of the cabin, got in his car, and left. Emma's free. She's asking for you. Catherine made the drive back to the original cabin in Rose's truck, Marcus and the children following in the Subaru. The sun was setting over the Oregon forest, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that made the landscape look almost sacred. They found Emma on the porch, leg elevated, face bruised from her earlier assault but eyes clear and defiant. Mother and daughter collided in an embrace that contained all the fear and relief of the past 48 hours. Emma was crying, and Catherine was crying. And somewhere in the forest, it felt like Margaret Whitmore's ghost could finally stop watching, stop waiting, finally rest. I knew you wouldn't trade. Emma's voice muffled against Catherine's shoulder. I knew you'd find another way. I would have traded everything for you. Never doubt that. But you found a better way. You made it impossible for him to win by making the truth bigger than both of you. Emma pulled back, managed a painful smile. That's what Margaret did, right? Made the truth too big to bury? She tried. We finished it for her. They spent that night in the cabin, all of them together, reading the social media responses as the story continued to explode across the internet. News crews were requesting interviews. Lawyers representing victimized families were organizing class action suits. Political figures were demanding oversight hearings. The machinery of justice, slow and grinding, had finally begun to turn. Rose had been quiet through most of it, sitting by the fireplace with Margaret's journals, reading the words her mother had written 70 years earlier. Finally, as midnight approached and the children dozed in the loft, she spoke. She watched me grow up, Margaret. She was at my school plays, my graduations, my wedding. I thought she was just some eccentric woman who took interest in the Porter family. Never knew she was my mother. Watching her daughter from a distance, she could never close. Catherine moved to sit beside her. She did it to protect you. If Blackwood had known about you, he would have used you as leverage. I know. Doesn't make it hurt less. Rose closed the journal. But it makes her sacrifice mean something. She gave up motherhood so I could live safe. Gave up justice in her lifetime so someone, you, could find it later. That's not tragedy. That's strategy. Marcus had been reviewing the legal filings that were already starting to accumulate. Motions from Blackwood's attorneys, counterfilings from the Attorney General, protective orders and discovery demands, and all the machinery of litigation spinning to life. We're going to be fighting this for years. Even with the evidence public, even with federal involvement, Blackwood has resources to drag this out indefinitely. Let him try. Catherine felt the exhaustion of the past weeks settling over her. But beneath it, something stronger. A sense of direction. The certainty of being on the right side of a fight that mattered. We have time. We have truth. And we have Margaret's example. She fought alone for 15 years before they silenced her. We're not alone. We're not going to be silenced. And we're going to win. Because losing isn't an option anymore. Outside, the Oregon night settled over the forest that had kept secrets for 70 years. In Portland, Journalists were working through the night, writing stories that would reshape understanding of regional history. In Pine Valley, families were gathering evidence of their own stolen land, preparing to join the fight. And in a mansion north of town, Victor Blackwood was learning what it felt like to watch an empire built on lies begin to crumble. Foundation crack by foundation crack. Truth by inescapable truth. The reckoning Margaret Whitmore died waiting for had finally begun. And now the real fight would test whether truth could defeat power built on 80 years of lies. The federal courthouse in Portland rose like a monument to institutional power, all granite and glass reflecting the November sky. Catherine climbed the steps with Marcus at her side, Rose following close behind, Dylan and Zoe flanking them like bodyguards too young for the role. Emma remained at the cabin with Dr. Brennan, her broken leg still weeks from full healing. But her testimony had been recorded in sworn deposition that Marcus carried in his briefcase, along with 17 ledgers that had spent 70 years hidden beneath a hearthstone.
The preliminary hearing would determine whether the evidence justified a full investigation. Whether Margaret Whitmore's life work meant anything to a justice system that preferred tidy conclusions over complicated truths. Whether power accumulated through theft could finally be forced to answer for its origins. Victor Blackwood arrived in a convoy, 3 black SUVs disgorging lawyers in suits that cost more than Catherine's former annual salary. He moved through the courthouse lobby with deliberate composure, eyes forward, expression carefully neutral. But when his gaze landed on Catherine for just a moment, she saw calculation there. Planning. The look of someone who'd lost a battle but remained confident about the war. Inside the courtroom, media filled the public gallery. Local reporters, Portland journalists, a crew from CNN covering the story as part of their ongoing series on rural corruption. The Blackwood Files website had logged 2.3 million unique visitors in 10 days. The story had gone national, then viral, then undeniable. But viral attention and legal accountability lived in different universes, and Catherine had learned enough about power to know publicity wasn't the same as justice. Judge Patricia Reeves entered precisely at 9 a.m., a woman in her 60s whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her reputation for impatience with theatrics. She reviewed the case file with visible skepticism, then addressed the packed courtroom with clipped efficiency. This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether the evidence presented warrants federal investigation into property fraud allegations spanning 1941 to 1957. The statute of limitations on criminal fraud has long expired. However, if we can establish that stolen property continues to generate profit under false ownership, civil remedies may be available to descendants of original owners. Mr. Reed, you may present your case. Marcus stood, and Catherine felt a surge of pride watching this young lawyer who'd risked everything on principle face down a room full of corporate attorneys. His voice carried steady and clear as he laid out the evidence methodically. James Whitmore's ledgers documenting 34 fraudulent property seizures. William Turner's confession detailing his role in falsifying county records. Payment receipts proving conspiracy between county officials and Blackwood Sr. Your Honor, this isn't ancient history. Blackwood Timber Corporation currently operates on land acquired through documented fraud. They cut timber from stolen acreage, develop properties on falsified titles, profit daily from crimes committed 80 years ago. The victims' families never received compensation. Many don't even know their grandparents' land was stolen rather than legitimately seized for tax default. This case demands investigation, not because the original crimes are prosecutable, but because their consequences continue to harm people today. Jonathan Price rose for Blackwood's defense, and Catherine braced for the counterattack.
He moved with the practiced ease of someone who destroyed better cases than this before breakfast. Your Honor, these allegations rely on documents of questionable provenance, unverifiable chain of custody, and biased interpretation by interested parties. The ledgers Mr. Reed presents were found in an abandoned cabin after 70 years of unknown storage conditions.
There's no way to verify they weren't altered, forged, or fabricated entirely. William Turner's so-called confession lacks any living witnesses to authenticate it. And Margaret Whitmore, he paused for effect, was a mentally unstable woman who abandoned her husband, gave away her child, and ultimately vanished under circumstances suggesting psychological breakdown rather than persecution. Rose's hands clenched in her lap, but she remained silent. Catherine reached over, squeezed her fingers in solidarity. They'd expected this. The attack on Margaret's credibility, the suggestion that trauma and resistance to abuse indicated insanity rather than strength. Price continued, warming to his theme. This court is being asked to overturn 80 years of legitimate property ownership based on the paranoid delusions of a disturbed individual and the financial desperation of her supposed descendants. The Blackwood family has served this community for 4 generations, providing employment, funding infrastructure, supporting charitable causes. To accuse them of building their success on theft is not justice. It's character assassination motivated by greed. Judge Reeves raised a hand, cutting off Price mid-sentence. Save the character testimony for trial, counselor. This hearing determines only whether the evidence warrants investigation, not whether Mr. Blackwood is a pillar of the community. She turned to Marcus.
Mr. Reed, I've reviewed the ledgers. They appear authentic in terms of paper aging, ink composition, handwriting analysis. But Mr. Price raises a valid point about chain of custody. How do you verify these documents haven't been altered in the 7 decades since they were allegedly written? Marcus pulled out his laptop, connected it to the courtroom's display system.
Your Honor, we've had the documents examined by 3 independent forensic experts. Dr. Ellen Rodriguez from the National Archives authenticated the paper as consistent with 1940s production, the ink as period appropriate, and the aging patterns as natural rather than artificially induced. Dr. James Hamilton, a handwriting analyst, compared the ledger entries to verified samples of James Whitmore's writing from county records, property deeds he signed, marriage licenses, birth certificates. The handwriting matches with 99.7% certainty. And Dr. Michael Torres, a forensic chemist, found no evidence of modern intervention, no synthetic materials, no chemical treatments that would suggest recent fabrication. He displayed the reports on screen, page after page of scientific analysis supporting authenticity. Price's expression flickered, just for a moment, revealing surprise that they'd been this thorough. Additionally, Marcus continued, we have contemporary corroboration. The Pine Valley Chronicle newspaper from April 1944 includes a legal notice about a tax auction for the Miller farm, matching the date in James Whitmore's ledger exactly. The Clatsop County Observer ran an editorial in 1946 questioning the unusually high number of tax foreclosures under William Turner's tenure as county clerk, concerns that align with the pattern documented in these ledgers. This isn't a single, unverified source. It's multiple independent records all pointing to systematic fraud. Judge Reeves examined the forensic reports with the careful attention of someone who understood their significance. And the property in question, the cabin where these documents were found, its ownership status? Legally disputed, Your Honor. Margaret Whitmore inherited the land from her grandfather in 1945 through a valid deed. Blackwood Corporation claims they acquired it in a 1944 tax auction. But according to James Whitmore's own ledgers, that auction was based on falsified tax delinquency. Margaret's taxes were paid in full. The auction should never have occurred. Price stood again. Your Honor,
Even if we accept the ledgers as genuine, which we don't, they prove only that James Whitmore believed the auctions were fraudulent. Belief isn't evidence.
And more importantly, Victor Blackwood Jr. had no knowledge of any alleged fraud when he assumed leadership of Blackwood Corporation in 1985. He's operated in good faith based on legal titles his family held for decades.
That's demonstrably false. Marcus pulled up another document. This is a ledger entry from December 8, 1956, written by James Whitmore. V. Blackwood Jr., age 29, now handling payments. Father retiring. Jr. knows everything, approves continuation of program.
Victor Blackwood wasn't an innocent inheritor. He was an active participant in the conspiracy.
The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Victor Blackwood's face went rigid, all pretense of calm evaporating. His lawyers huddled in emergency consultation while Price tried to maintain composure. That entry is hearsay at best, fabricated at worst.
Without James Whitmore alive to testify, without Victor Blackwood Sr. available for questioning, this is meaningless accusation.
Not meaningless. A new voice cut through the chaos, and Catherine turned to see an elderly man standing in the public gallery. I witnessed it. I can testify. Judge Reeves banged her gavel. Order! Sir, state your name and relevance. Robert Turner, son of William Turner, the county clerk who helped steal those properties.
He moved forward with the careful dignity of someone who'd spent decades carrying guilt.
My father confessed everything before he died in 1982. Told me how Blackwood Sr. paid him to falsify records, how James Whitmore signed off on fraudulent assessments, how it continued for 16 years until people started asking questions. And he told me about the meeting in December 1956 when Victor Jr. took over the payment operation. My father was there. He saw it happen.
Price tried to object, but Judge Reeves waved him silent.
Mr. Turner, you're volunteering testimony against the Blackwood family? Do you understand you're potentially exposing yourself to legal liability? I understand I'm 85 years old and I've been carrying my father's sins long enough. He was too scared to speak up. I won't be. Robert Turner's voice carried across the courtroom with surprising strength. Victor Blackwood knew. He knew from the beginning.
And if this court wants sworn testimony about what my father witnessed, I'll provide it.
The preliminary hearings stretched through the afternoon as more witnesses emerged. Patricia Whitmore, descendant of Alexander Whitmore, brought property surveys from the 1930s showing her family's land boundaries before they mysteriously shifted in the 1944 records.
Daniel Miller,
no relation to the sheriff, presented a diary kept by his grandmother describing how her family farm was seized for unpaid taxes despite having receipts proving full payment. 3 other families contributed similar evidence, each one another brick in the wall of systematic theft Marcus was constructing. By 5 p.m., Judge Reeves had heard enough. She assembled her notes with methodical precision, then delivered her ruling with the weight of someone who understood its implications.
This court finds sufficient evidence to warrant full federal investigation into property fraud allegations against Blackwood Timber Corporation and its predecessors. The documentation presented, while old, appears authentic and is corroborated by multiple independent sources. The involvement of government officials in the alleged conspiracy raises potential federal civil rights violations. I'm referring this case to the U.S. Attorney's Office with a recommendation for immediate investigation.
She paused, looking directly at Victor Blackwood. Additionally, given the December 1956 ledger entry and Mr. Robert Turner's testimony, I'm ordering Blackwood Corporation to preserve all financial records from 1956 to present. Any destruction of documents will be treated as obstruction of justice. The gavel fell. The courtroom exploded with noise.
Reporters shouting questions, lawyers arguing procedure, victims' families celebrating tentative victory.
Catherine felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder, grounding her as the magnitude washed over them. They'd done it. Not one. The real fight would take years, but forced the system to acknowledge what it had ignored for 7 decades. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded them in a scrum of cameras and microphones. Catherine had prepared a statement with Marcus's help, practicing it until the words felt natural rather than rehearsed. Margaret Whitmore gave up everything to preserve the truth about what happened in Pine Valley. She sacrificed her marriage, her daughter, ultimately, her life. Today, that truth was finally heard by people with the power to act on it. Justice delayed isn't justice denied, not if we refuse to stop fighting. A reporter pushed forward. Mrs. Morrison, Victor Blackwood's attorneys are already filing appeals. They're calling this a witch hunt based on falsified evidence. How do you respond? I respond by pointing to the forensic analysis, the expert testimony, the independent corroboration from multiple sources. The evidence speaks for itself. And if Mr. Blackwood wants to challenge it, I welcome that. Let's put everything in the light and see which version survives scrutiny. What about compensation? If the investigation proves fraud, are you seeking financial damages? Catherine hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself imagine what victory might actually look like in practical terms. This was never about money. It's about families who lost their land getting acknowledgement that it was stolen, not legitimately seized. It's about holding powerful people accountable, even when they think enough time has passed to escape consequences. If compensation results from that, it should go to the victims' descendants, the people whose grandparents and great-grandparents were robbed. Rose stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her small stature. And I want to be clear, I'm Margaret Whitmore's daughter. I have DNA evidence proving it. My mother spent her life hiding that relationship to protect me from the same people who killed my father and destroyed dozens of families. Today, I can finally claim her legacy publicly, and I'm using my inheritance rights to support every family affected by this fraud. Margaret's fight is our fight now. The revelation that Rose Porter was Margaret's daughter sent the media into another frenzy. Cameras flashed, questions overlapped, the story gaining new dimensions of human interest that would keep it alive in news cycles for weeks. Catherine saw calculation in how Rose had timed the announcement, not during the hearing where it might seem like manipulation, but afterward, where it reinforced their credibility and emotional authority. They extracted themselves from the media circus and retreated to Marcus's office, a cramped space in a building that had seen better decades. Dylan and Zoe collapsed onto the worn sofa, while Marcus pulled out Chinese takeout containers he'd ordered ahead, knowing they'd all be too exhausted to think about cooking. The U.S. attorney will want to interview everyone. Marcus sorted through containers, distributing food with distracted efficiency. They'll verify the evidence independently, contact more families, build their own case from the ground up. It'll take months, maybe years.
We have time.
Catherine accepted lo mein and chopsticks, realized she hadn't eaten since dawn. Victor Blackwood spent 80 years thinking he was untouchable. We can spend however long it takes proving him wrong. Dylan had been quiet through most of the day, absorbing everything with 12-year-old seriousness. Now he spoke with careful consideration. He's not going to just accept this. The investigation, the publicity, all of it. He'll fight back. He already is fighting back. Marcus pulled up his laptop, showing them the legal filings that had started hitting his inbox within an hour of Judge Reeves's ruling. Defamation suit against Catherine for $10 million. Motion to suppress evidence based on illegal search and seizure. Complaint to the Oregon Bar about my professional conduct. 3 different procedural challenges to the investigation. He's throwing everything at us. Rose examined the filings with the practical eye of someone who'd been fighting power for 50 years. These are designed to bankrupt you before the real case even starts. Force you to spend everything you have on defense, make you too poor to continue the offense. Can he actually win any of these? Catherine's brief moment of celebration curdled into anxiety. Probably not. But winning isn't the point. Draining your resources is the point, making you so tired and broke and desperate that you accept a settlement and go away. Marcus set down his container, appetite apparently lost. I've got maybe 15,000 in savings. My firm is supportive, but they can't fund a prolonged legal defense pro bono. If Blackwood really wants to bury us in litigation, he absolutely can. The silence that followed carried the weight of that reality. They'd won a battle, but the war required resources they didn't have. Endurance they might not possess. Sacrifice they hadn't fully calculated. Zoe spoke into the quiet, her voice carrying that eerie quality of someone channeling knowledge from elsewhere. Margaret wrote about this. In her journal from November 1956, she said, "They'll try to make the cost of fighting higher than the value of winning. But freedom doesn't have a price tag, and truth doesn't negotiate."
Catherine looked at her 8-year-old daughter. This child who carried a dead woman's entire life story in perfect memory, and felt something crystallize. They'd already paid costs Blackwood couldn't imagine. Homelessness, injury, separation, fear. What were a few more legal bills compared to Emma's broken leg? What was financial bankruptcy compared to moral bankruptcy? Then we keep fighting. We crowdfund if we have to. We find pro bono lawyers who care about justice more than billable hours. We turn every lawsuit he files into another news story about powerful men trying to silence victims. She stood, pacing the small office with renewed energy. Blackwood's operating from an old playbook: intimidate, litigate, isolate. But we're operating in a different era. Social media, crowdfunding, viral attention. His weapons don't work the same way anymore. Rose pulled out her phone, already typing. I still have contacts from Occupy Wall Street. They built a whole infrastructure for supporting legal defense funds, connecting activists with civil rights attorneys, coordinating media campaigns. Give me 48 hours, and I'll have a network ready to mobilize. Marcus was nodding, calculations visible behind his eyes. The ACLU has a division that handles civil rights violations by corporate entities. If we frame this correctly, systematic theft enabled by corrupt government officials targeting rural families without resources to fight back, they might take it on. And once they're involved, Blackwood's intimidation tactics lose effectiveness. The planning stretched into evening, fueled by cold Chinese food and the particular energy of people who decided consequences didn't matter anymore. They drafted crowdfunding copy, identified sympathetic journalists, mapped out a media strategy that would turn each of Blackwood's legal attacks into proof of his desperation. Catherine's phone rang near midnight, Emma calling from the cabin where Dr. Brennan was staying with her during recovery.
Mom, you need to see this. Turn on CNN.
Marcus found the remote, powered on the small TV mounted in his office corner. The screen showed footage of the Portland courthouse, then cut to a studio interview with Jennifer Castellano, the investigative reporter who'd broken the story in the Oregonian. What we're seeing is a classic David and Goliath story with modern implications, Jennifer explained to the anchor. A homeless single mother discovers her great-aunt's evidence of systematic land theft, stands up to $1 billion corporation, forces a federal investigation.
But the really fascinating angle is how social media changed the game.
20 years ago, Victor Blackwood could have buried this quietly. Today, 2.3 million people have seen the evidence. You can't threaten or sue your way out of that kind of transparency. The segment continued for 12 minutes, laying out the case with devastating clarity. They'd interviewed descendants of victimized families, shown documents side by side with expert analysis, traced the Blackwood fortune from stolen land to current assets. By the time it ended, Catherine's phone was buzzing with notifications, friend requests, interview offers, messages of support from strangers across the country. "We're going viral again." Dylan watched his own phone light up with social media alerts. "People are calling you the homeless hero, and it's trending on Twitter."
Catherine winced at the title. She'd never wanted to be anyone's hero, just wanted a place for her kids to sleep safely.
But she understood the narrative power of it, how a desperate mother fighting a corrupt empire resonated in ways that complex property law never could. The next morning brought a development that shifted the battlefield entirely. Marcus received a call from an attorney in Washington, D.C.
Eliza Navarro, senior counsel at the Institute for Justice, a nonprofit that specialized in property rights cases against government overreach. "We've been following the Blackwood case with great interest," she explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd won battles that seemed unwinnable. "What you've uncovered isn't just regional fraud. It's a textbook example of eminent domain abuse, civil asset forfeiture corruption, and government officials conspiring with private interests to steal from vulnerable populations. We'd like to represent the victims' families in a class action suit. No fees, full resources of our organization, and we don't settle." Marcus put her on speaker so Catherine and Rose could hear. "What's the catch?" "No catch. This is exactly the kind of case we exist for. Government betraying its citizens, powerful interests exploiting the law, families losing everything because the system is rigged against them. We bring constitutional challenges. We pursue civil rights violations, and we win." "How often?" Catherine needed hard numbers, not idealistic promises. 73% success rate over the last decade. We've recovered over $400 million in seized assets for our clients. We've gotten laws changed in 15 states. And we've made it very expensive for entities like Blackwood Corporation to think they can use the legal system as a weapon against ordinary people. The conversation lasted 2 hours as Eliza laid out their strategy. They'd represent all 34 families whose land had been stolen, filing coordinated lawsuits in federal court under civil rights statutes. They'd seek not just compensation, but injunctive relief. Court orders forcing Blackwood to divest properties acquired through fraud. They'd pursue criminal referrals where evidence supported it. And they'd do it all with a legal team that made Blackwood's expensive attorneys look like amateurs. "I need to be clear about what this means for you." Eliza directed this to Catherine specifically. "Once we file, Victor Blackwood will escalate. He'll dig into your background, looking for anything to discredit you. He'll try to make this about your character instead of his crimes. It'll get ugly and personal in ways you might not be prepared for." Catherine thought about Emma's broken leg, about months of homelessness and fear, about standing in this office planning to fight a billion-dollar corporation with crowd-funded legal defense. How much uglier could it get? "I'm already living in a cabin without electricity or running water because he orchestrated my firing and eviction. My daughter has a permanent limp because his people ran her off the road. He's held us hostage, threatened us, done everything except actually kill us. So no, I'm not worried about ugly and personal. I'm worried about losing." "Can you win?" "Yes." No hesitation, no qualification. "We can win." More importantly, you've already won the part that matters most. You made the truth public. You forced accountability. Everything from here is just making sure that accountability has teeth. They signed the representation agreement that afternoon, watched as the Institute for Justice filed a 247-page class action complaint that read like an indictment of everything Blackwood Timber had built its fortune on. The lawsuit named Victor Blackwood personally, Blackwood Timber Corporation, and 15 current executives as defendants. It sought $340 million in damages, return of all fraudulently acquired properties, and criminal referrals for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. The media coverage shifted from human interest story to genuine scandal. National outlets picked it up: New York Times, Washington Post, NPR.
Legal analysts called it potentially the largest property fraud case in Pacific Northwest history. Political figures started weighing in, with Oregon senators calling for congressional hearings on government corruption enabling corporate land grabs. Victor Blackwood issued a statement through his attorneys, denying everything and painting himself as the victim of a coordinated attack by activists and opportunists. But the denials rang hollow against the wall of evidence now available to anyone with an internet connection. The Blackwood Files website was getting 100,000 visits daily. Margaret's story had become shorthand for corporate corruption, government complicity, and the long shadow cast by crimes people thought time had erased. Catherine returned to the cabin to find it transformed. Volunteers had installed solar panels donated by an environmental group. A portable generator provided backup power. Someone had delivered a proper water filtration system. The community that had ignored Margaret's fight 70 years ago was rallying around Catherine's, as if collective guilt demanded atonement. Emma was sitting on the porch when Catherine arrived, legs still casted but looking stronger. "There's something I need to tell you about the day I got hurt." Catherine sat beside her daughter, bracing for whatever confession was coming. "The truck that hit me. I saw the driver clearly when he got out. It was Sheriff Miller's deputy, the one who always parks outside the courthouse. I recognized him from when we first drove through town." Emma's hands trembled slightly. "I didn't say anything before because I was scared. If law enforcement was in on it, who would protect us?" "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I'm not scared anymore." And because if we're really doing this, really taking down everyone involved, we can't leave out the people who enabled it.
Sheriff Miller knew. His department knew. They're still protecting Blackwood now, probably destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses. We have to expose all of it. Catherine pulled her daughter close, feeling the cost of this fight measured in a 16-year-old's lost innocence. Emma had learned what adults preferred children never understand: that institutions meant to protect could be corrupted, that authority could be bought, that justice wasn't automatic but had to be fought for by people brave enough or desperate enough to challenge power. "We'll tell Eliza Navarro. She'll know what to do with it." Catherine smoothed Emma's hair, the same gesture she'd used when her daughter was small and nightmares seemed like the worst thing the world could offer. "And Emma, I'm proud of you. Not for getting hurt, for refusing to let that hurt make you give up." That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She sat by the fireplace reading through Margaret's journals for probably the 100th time, finding new meaning in passages she'd glossed over before. One entry from January 1957 stopped her cold. "They think time is on their side, that if they wait long enough, everyone who knows the truth will die, or give up, or forget."
But truth doesn't have an expiration date. It just waits for someone willing to speak it, no matter the cost. Catherine closed the journal, looked around at the cabin Margaret had used as refuge and fortress, evidence vault, and final testament. This space had witnessed one woman's lonely fight against impossible odds. Now it was witnessing another woman's fight, but this time with allies, resources, public attention. Margaret had fought alone,
Catherine fought surrounded by victims' families, ethical lawyers, journalists committed to exposing corruption. The difference was everything. Morning brought news that the U.S. attorney had convened a grand jury to investigate potential criminal charges related to the property fraud conspiracy. Robert Turner had been called to testify. So had 3 former Blackwood Timber employees who'd come forward with evidence that the corporation routinely destroyed old records that might prove problematic. The machinery of criminal justice, long dormant, was finally grinding to life. Marcus arrived at the cabin with fresh developments. Victor Blackwood has stepped down as CEO. His board forced him out, citing reputational damage to the company. They're trying to separate the corporation from his personal liability. Set up a firewall so they can claim any crimes were his alone, not institutional policy. Will that work? Rose had joined them, bringing coffee and determination. Legally, maybe. Public relations? Absolutely not. The Institute for Justice is already positioning this as a corporate culture of corruption, not one rogue executive. And with the criminal investigation focusing on the 1956 handoff from Blackwood Sr. to Jr., they're going to have a hard time claiming Victor was just following established procedures rather than actively participating in ongoing fraud. Catherine felt something shift, the sense that momentum had finally tipped decisively in their direction. What happens next? Grand jury testimony continues for another month. If they indict, criminal trial probably starts in 8 to 10 months. The civil case moves slower. Discovery, depositions, expert witnesses. But Eliza thinks we might get summary judgment on some claims based on the strength of the documentary evidence, which means portions of the case could be resolved in our favor without even going to trial. Dylan had been listening while sketching something in a notebook. Catherine saw it was a map of Pine Valley with properties marked that had been stolen, overlaid with current Blackwood holdings. If they give the land back, what happens to the people living there now? The families who bought houses or farms, thinking they were legitimate. It was a complication Catherine hadn't fully considered. Innocent current owners caught in the middle of historic injustice, potentially losing homes because of crimes committed before they were born. That's where the compensation piece comes in. Marcus pointed to the map. Some properties will return to original families. Others where that's not practical. The families receive monetary compensation based on current land value, plus damages for 80 years of lost use and profit. It's messy and complicated, and nobody gets perfect justice. But it's better than letting the theft stand unchallenged. Zoe had been quiet, processing everything with that intense focus that preceded her rare pronouncements. Margaret would be happy. Not because we're getting revenge or making people hurt, but because the truth finally matters to someone besides her. The simple observation cut through all the legal complexity and strategic planning, reminded them what this was actually about. A woman who died, or disappeared, or fled, believing she'd failed. Who'd hidden evidence not knowing if anyone would ever find it, use it, care about it. Who'd sacrificed her relationship with her daughter on the hope that someday, somehow, justice might still be possible. We should mark her grave, Rose spoke quietly. When this is over, when the trials are done and the truth is established, we should find out what happened to her. Whether she died in 1957 or lived somewhere else under a different name. And we should make sure people remember her as more than just evidence in a legal case. Catherine thought about Margaret Whitmore, young mother fleeing abuse, detective uncovering conspiracy, archivist preserving truth, ghost haunting the cabin where her fight began. The woman deserved better than to be a footnote in someone else's victory. She deserved recognition as the person who made that victory possible. We'll find her, Catherine promised. However long it takes, wherever the trail leads, we'll bring her home. The weeks that followed blurred together in a cascade of legal proceedings, media appearances, and the slow, grinding progress of institutional accountability. The grand jury returned indictments against Victor Blackwood on 17 counts of fraud and conspiracy. Sheriff Miller was placed on administrative leave pending investigation into corruption allegations. 3 county commissioners resigned rather than face questions about their relationships with Blackwood Timber. The Institute for Justice filed motions in rapid succession, each one another hammer blow against the defense. They established standing for all 34 victim families. They demonstrated ongoing harm from historical fraud. They connected current Blackwood profits directly to properties acquired through documented theft. Blackwood's legal team fought desperately, throwing up every procedural barrier they could construct. But each barrier fell under the weight of evidence that couldn't be explained away, testimony that couldn't be impeached, documents that existed in multiple authenticated forms. By February, 6 months after Catherine first found Margaret's trunk, the outlines of resolution were becoming visible. Blackwood Corporation was negotiating a settlement that would include $280 million in compensation to victim families, divestiture of 12 major properties, and a public acknowledgement of the historical fraud. Victor Blackwood himself faced trial on criminal charges, his legal team working frantically to broker a plea deal that might keep him out of prison. Catherine stood in the cabin one February evening, watching snow fall through the trees, and felt the weight of months lifting gradually from her shoulders. Emma's leg had healed, though she walked with a slight limp that doctors said might fade with time, or might not. Dylan had started school in Pine Valley, making friends, becoming part of a community. Zoe continued to amaze teachers with her perfect recall, though they'd learned not to ask where she got certain historical knowledge. Rose had offered Catherine a partnership in the general store. Marcus had hinted that the Institute for Justice was looking for investigators with her particular combination of determination and ethical clarity. The future, for the first time in years, looked like something other than an endless series of crises to barely survive. The trial date approached. Catherine prepared to testify, to tell her story for the record, to stand in a courtroom and explain how a desperate search for shelter had uncovered 70 years of hidden truth. She was ready. Not because she'd won, the real verdict wouldn't come for months yet, but because she'd already accomplished what mattered most. She'd refused to be erased. She'd made them listen, and she'd proven that sometimes, when you have nothing left to lose, you become dangerous to people who thought their power made them untouchable. Margaret Whitmore's fight was ending the way it should have ended decades ago, with truth acknowledged, victims compensated, and power held accountable for the crimes that built it. Not Margaret's personal victory, since she disappeared too soon for that, but victory in her name, earned by people who'd inherited her evidence and chosen to finish what she began. And that, Catherine understood now, was justice enough.